Hello, everybody. This is Agent Swarm, continuing my translation and reading and commenting of an untranslated book of interviews with Slavoj Zizek in French that came out in 2010. It's a very interesting book because he says some things that I can't find him saying anywhere else in English, and he brings together sometimes things that are a little all over the place in English. The title of the book is À travers le réel. So I'm translating that as through the real or across the real. It means both. If I wanted to use a verb instead of à travers is prepositional phrase or prepositional expression. It means across or through. But there's the root à travers. So if I wanted to use a verb, I could say traversing the real, just as we have traversing the fantasy. And that makes me wonder, why do we say traversing the fantasy? Traverser in French is a normal word. It means to cross. So traverser la rue is to cross the street. It's not to traverse the street. So it's been traditionally, traverser le fantasme has been traditionally translated as traversing the phantasm, but you could just as easily have said crossing the fantasy. And just for fun, I could decompose à travers, le travers, as also for traverser, traverse. It has one part, tra, which is a sort of shortened form of trans, and which means through, and vers as in verse, as in if we go to our Latin roots, it means to turn or to bend. So somebody who has traversed the real or the fantasy would logically be a transvert. So instead of having just introverts and extroverts, we can have a transvert, or as opposed to a convert or a pervert, we could have a transvert. So I'm just throwing that out there. That's my invention. The transvert would be perhaps the Lacanian Zizekian ideal. Anyhow, let's get into the chapter. The chapter 2 is called The Object Lacan. It's got three parts. The first part is called Maître Jacques. It concerns the evolution of Lacan's idea of what the aim of psychoanalysis is. I'm going to deal with that today in this video. The second part is called The Readings of Lacan. That's an ambiguous subtitle. It can mean the readings of Lacan's readings, what Lacan actually read. And it does talk about that. It talks about what Lacan's reading of Hegel and Heidegger. And it could also mean the readings or interpretations that people have made of Lacan's work. So in particular, he talks a little about Jacques Alain Millet's readings of Lacan. And the third section is called Feminine Masculine, which is self-explanatory. It's also probably a reference to the film of Jean-Luc Godard, whose title is Masculine Feminine. So I think we could see it as an inversion of Godard's film in some way, and that talks about love and Badiou's views on love. So today I'm just going to talk about Master Jacques. Remember that we were just talking, or Zizek and Fabian Tabi were just talking about the idea of a pact between Deleuzians and Lacanians, so Deleuze-Lacan pact, around the idea of, or the concept or the theory of the real, and giving the highest importance to the real, as against privileging the imaginary and the mirror phase, or the symbolic. So, and the second part of that last section of chapter 1 was concerned with the idea that psychoanalysis is not limited just to the couch, the analyst's couch, but is from the very beginning and constitutively concerned with the social field and the cultural field. So that's where Zizek considers that hysteria is a historical phenomenon, in that the mode of hysteria changes over time, and that he gives out his battle cry, if you want: everything is to be analyzed. So that's where we were at the end of chapter 1. Chapter 2 begins with Fabian Tabi and going on directly from there. It is time to come to your relation to Lacan. In what way is Lacan essential in order to understand the subject, the unconscious, and the real? So that's back to a central question. First of all, this is Zizek's reply. First of all, one must not overestimate, when one talks of the unconscious, all the theories which confer on this, the unconscious, a content like a vast flux of pre-reflexive consciousness, a stream of consciousness, he says the term in English, of a writer like Joyce when he writes Ulysses. For it there, in that case, it's a question less of the Freudian unconscious or Lacanian than the Jungian unconscious. Okay, there he goes on again on his theme of contrasting Freud and Lacan as against Jung. I gave my reasons in the last video to see this not in a fully realistic way, but as part of the sort of conceptual theater that Zizek sets up in order to think things through. This is something well described by Deleuze. We need a sort of theater of thought where we will have positive conceptual characters and negative conceptual characters. So Jung there is the stand-in for the negative conceptual character, the type of folk psychoanalysis that is oriented around the content, that's already bad, just content-oriented psychoanalysis, and as well in the content has bad content because Jung is, for Zizek, full of archetypes. So I argued in the last video that we should see this as not a real worked out reference to Jung and Jungians, but to folk Jungians, to substantified Jungians. There do exist, if they're not exactly Zizekian Jungians, but there is a powerful school of Hegelian Jungians who, around the figure of Wolfgang Gigerich, a German who's been translated a lot into English, and for them, Jung, excuse me, Jung is best understood if we deconstruct his Kantian metaphysics and we use Hegelian dialectics to, or metaphysics, to reformulate Jung. So they're making a move like Zizek makes with Lacan, when he says that when Lacan talks about Hegel, he doesn't really mean the real Hegel, but the Kojevian reading of Hegel that was popular in France. And when Lacan is not talking about Hegel, but just doing his thing, that's where he's the most Hegelian. So they're doing the same move with Jung, where Jung talks about Hegel, which is usually quite critical. They argue that Jung doesn't understand Hegel at all and is working on fashionable images of Hegel, and that when Jung forgets about Hegel and does his own thing, at least a large part of his work is in fact Hegelian. So that's my slight disagreement with Zizek, but I think the basic distinction is important. You have content-oriented psychoanalysis, whether it's Jungian or Freudian or Lacanian, and you have a quite different sort of psychoanalysis that is exemplified by Lacan and brought out even more clearly by Zizek. So Zizek continues on this line. He's talking about the folk, what I call the folk Jungian unconscious. I am not unaware, so I am well aware of the anecdote according to which Joyce refused to go into analysis with Jung, even though a rich American woman offered him a scholarship or a stipend to go and live comfortably in Zurich if he accepted the experience or the experiment. But nonetheless, so despite Joyce having refused to go into analysis with Jung, which Zizek seems to consider a good point, nonetheless, Joyce's epic gesture of as a writer is Jungian. One does not understand what the unconscious is as long as one remains, I would add, at the level of this sort of representations. Lacan breaks radically with this folklore. So you don't have to believe me, but Jung for Zizek is the folkloric Jung. Is there another Jung? I think there is, but folklore here is content oriented, and behind the folklore, there's the basic mistake of being content oriented and of substantifying the concepts. He continues, and there the idea of the real is fundamental in order to understand what Lacan wants to tell us. Dot, dot, dot. The real is not even an inertia that one could only very partially dialectize or dialecticize by the symbolic, by words. So the real is not just that inertia that resists complete dialectization or symbolization. I developed this a little in, he cites a title of a book in French, one of his books in French, Jacques Lacan à Hollywood et ailleurs, Jacques Lacan in Hollywood and elsewhere. I think that means that's a reference to what in English the title is Enjoy Your Symptom, Lacan in and out of Hollywood. So I've developed this idea in Enjoy Your Symptom. Lacan says that reality is only the grimace of the real, and vice versa. But I prefer the second version, that is to say, the real is only the grimace of reality. That would be Zizek's preferred version of the proverb. If one says that reality is only a grimace of the real, that can be understood in a Nietzschean way. That is to say, there's the chaotic real, and what we call reality is only this real disciplined. Form is imposed on the wild real, that is to say, a grimace. I prefer more the idea that the real is only a grimace of reality. So, if we say reality is only a grimace of the real, we're positing a substantial real, which may be in some images a chaotic real, and then we put a form onto that, and that's the grimace, and we get reality. So that's too substantial, too substantifying of the real for Zizek. Zizek prefers to think that reality, which we know is a symbolic construction, grimaces. So these are the points of impossibility, and that's where the real can be found, in the grimaces of reality. So there's no wild real behind reality. There's the real in the grimaces. I would also like to say the anomalies of reality. So he's pushing Foucault around the time of the order of things and the archaeology of knowledge, who says there's criticizing phenomenology. There's no wild experience, that is to say, experience completely outside the grids of interpretation. Zizek is going one step further. He's saying, yes, there's no wild experience. And in fact, you're not going far enough, Foucault. There's no wild real as well. So Zizek continues, the real is not a real that is more fundamental than reality. This is the key. The real is a surface, a pure surface, which is at the same time a distortion. So we saw him talking about distortion at the end of chapter 1, where he talked about analyzing society and finding that ideology was and neurosis was a pathological distortion of a fundamental normal mechanism, and the psychoanalysis took us beyond that to see that as well this fundamental normal mechanism is itself a pathological distortion. So it's the same move there. The real itself is a surface, a pure surface, which is at the same time a distortion. So if you undid all the distortions, that's which you can't really do, you wouldn't get to the real. There'd be just nothing left. You'll be left with your hands empty. Fabian Tabi continues. How then does the symbolic, that is to say, our human capacity to think in this language which constitutes us, and then the imaginary, our illusory part, but which makes us believe that the real is nonetheless retained or caught in the symbolic network. How then does the symbolic and the imaginary do the symbolic and the imaginary how then are the symbolic and the imaginary articulated in and around this real? Zizek replies, my thesis is that the triad of real, symbolic, and imaginary is repeated or repeats itself in what we call the real. And I think that for many intellectuals coming from the human sciences, from the study of culture, the real remains what I call the imaginary real. The real that is too imaginary, horrible, an abyss, the monster, the horla, from the story by Guy de Maupassant, the horla that Lacan evokes. This idea is that the real is this too strong presence that one tries by way of the symbolic network to contain and to regiment. Or, well, this real is not the fundamental real. So intellectuals learn a smattering of Lacan, and they get this idea of the real as the overpowering, excessive, monstrous, Cthulhu-like thing with a capital T. And that's already good, but it's not enough. That's just the imaginary real. And the real is also the symbolic real and the real real, as we shall see. Um, First, one will have to take into account the symbolic real, um, uh, of which quantum mechanics is the most beautiful example. At the symbolic level, it has no sense, it's meaningless. Quantum physics is meaningless. And that's why it's the real. So there we're getting uh, a more hardline approach to what the real is in terms of the full deployment of uh, Lacan's categories. Fabian Tarby asks, so for you, the symbolic real corresponds also to the mathematical theory of sets, the mathematical set theory, from which Badiou draws his ontology. Yes, says Zizek. We'll come back to that shortly, and he does later in the book, or they do. But one must, above all, understand that which is neither the real that is still imaginary, nor the real that is still symbolic, the real that he just described as typified by quantum mechanics. We must understand what is neither the still imaginary real nor the still symbolic real. We must understand what is the real real, which is purely formal. It is only an obstacle without any substance. It's a difference, but absolutely without substance. Something which quelque chose qui cloche, quelque chose, something which is not right, something that doesn't sound right, something wrong somewhere. That's quelque chose qui cloche. It's a sort of colloquial expression. That is the discovery of Lacan, or that's Lacan's discovery. I think, besides, that it is there at that point on the difference without substance, or the real that's an obstacle without substance. It's there that Lacan, without knowing it, is close to Hegel. We could even force the translation of it, is closest to Hegel. Without knowing it, because when Lacan speaks of Hegel, it's always across, the famous à travers, whose meaning I commented at the beginning. It's across, or here means across by way of, by means of, Kojève or Hippolyte. So, once again, when Lacan is talking about Hegel, he usually gets Hegel wrong, because he's learnt his Hegel from the vision of Hegel expressed in the works of Kojève or Hippolyte. When Lacan is talking about the real, in particular, as a desubstantivized real, or a substantivized difference, there is where he's closest to Hegel. There is very clearly in Lacan's work there are very rarely in Lacan's work analyses that are truly immanent to the text of Hegel himself. So it's folk Hegel. There's no precise working out of text, no exegetical reading of Hegel's text. There's sort of this synthetic globalizing allusion to Hegel, which is a folk Hegel and not the real Hegel. He, that is to say Lacan, has never done with Hegel what he did with Kant in Kant with Kant avec Sade, Kant with Sade. So this is circling around the same point because it's important and because Zizek is gradually getting clearer and clearer about what he finds the most Hegelian in Lacan, and it's this notion of the real. He's already said that, and now he's making it even more precise. It's the real, that is to say, the substantified or non-substantified real, that is pure obstacle without substance, or that is pure surface that is at the same time pure distortion. Fabian Tabi picks up on this point. You have repositioned the relation between real, symbolic, and imaginary. So he's trying to reformulate in more simple terms what Zizek is accomplishing by this discussion. But unfortunately, Zizek is going to say that it's not quite that. Zizek replies, I'm not sure that I have repositioned this relation. My thesis would be rather that I have tried to think in relation to Lacan something resembling that which is produced in quantum mechanics when the undulatory indetermination, so the wave indetermination, is found in or finds itself in a determinate position, a corpuscular position. So there we're getting the basic image that Zizek discusses in lots of books, in Less Than Nothing, in Sex and the Failed Absolute, and in lots of other places, that you have this wave form of reality where it's superposed states, and then at certain moments, maybe that's the famous point de capiton or quilting point, where the waves suddenly become no longer superposed probabilities, but one precise thing, one body or corpuscule, and that's the collapse of the wave packet. Fabian Tabi straight away understands this reference. It says the reduction of the wave packet. Zizek replies, yes, in this sense, Lacan does not have a fixed position. So Lacan is more like the wave packet in superposition. It's is Lacan's position. It's rather a quantic oscillation. The duty of the great interpretations of Lacan is to operate this reduction, as you say. So we've got the superposed waves of possible meanings in Lacan, and we're not meant to mimic Lacan and have a text that is just as obscure, just as ambiguous and multivalent as Lacan's text, where, according to Zizek, we're meant to collapse the wave function of Lacan's text and take up a clear and sharp line of interpretation. So we're not going to try and sort of cover all our bases at the same time so as not to be criticizable. We are meant, in Zizek's idea of things, to have the courage to collapse the wave packet and take a stand on a particular position of interpretation. This is to say, that's what it is. That's the imaginary, the real, and the symbolic, and not just to fabricate or create a generalization. I have tried to do this across multiple interpretive gestures. So I, Zizek, have tried to collapse the wave packet and the superposed meanings and take a stand on a particular interpretation. And he calls that the duty of great interpretations. So there's no sense that all interpretations are equally valid. There are great interpretations and there are mediocre interpretations. Fabian Tabi continues. He asks, but you introduce, in my opinion, yet another idea in relation to the Lacanian real. There is not just the reduplication of the orders in the real, the three orders of real, symbolic, and imaginary. There is also what you call the parallax, a concept. I am saying this very grosso modo, very sketchily, a concept which supposes that there are only theoretical points of view on the real whose simultaneity is ungraspable, unseizable, if I want to be really literal. Zizek replies straight away, watch out! The thesis of Lacan, according to which the real is that which always returns to its place, is the object of an evolution. So here he's going, he's done the ultimate Lacanian interpretation of the real, and then he's going to show the evolution of Lacan through different epochs of his own thought before he gets to that ultimate interpretation. It's true that up to the middle of the 1950s, Lacan understands by real massive reality without lack or whole. Nothing is lacking to the real or in the real. The real is that which is always there. So he's saying that Lacan, from the beginning, whether you decide to date the beginning of Lacan as Lacan, to the mid-1950s, was very close to a substantified concept of the real. For example, in one of his first seminars, he talks to a woman who is in the front row, probably libidinal, he says, and don't see why she will be libidinal, and the fact that Lacan talks to her is not libidinal, but let's continue, and says to her that understanding the real, or to understand the real, is to understand that the table, um, probably best to call it, it's written table, probably best to call it a desk there, that the desk where she's seated is there, whether she be there or not. That's a real put down, maybe. Or it's just a really refined philosophical point. Maybe Lacan saw Berkeleyan idealism in the way this woman student or attendant was present. So he said, Lacan said, to understand the real is to understand that the table or the desk where she's seated is there, whether she is there or not. This is the massivity of this non-dialectizable real. This is almost the real of Sartre as described in Nausea by Sartre. But afterwards, Lacan tries to reinterpret the real as something which is non-symbolizable and which one cannot get rid of as a traumatism. It resists and it returns. So there you've got two concepts of the real in Lacan. You've got the massive substantial real. It's there whether you're with it or not, whether you're observing it or not. That's pre-quantum, by the way. And then there's the non-symbolizable real, which resists symbolization and always returns to its place. There, Fabian Tarby responds, that's where there is the relation between the real and the unconscious. That's where the relation between the real and the unconscious appears clearly. Zizek replies, yes, because habitually, when one talks about jouissance, enjoyment, one underlines the metaphysical impossibility of its presence. There's a sort of, in quotation marks, enjoyment is impossible, it is always a failure, etc. End of quote. But this is, but what is more interesting in Lacan is that jouissance, enjoyment, is not only that which is failed or that which fails, it's also that which we cannot get rid of. It comes back in the very gesture which tries to get rid of it. It's the enjoyment or jouir. Logically, we need another word. So it's the enjoying which comes back in the very act which tries to get rid of it. Let us imagine that you are an obsessional. Fabian Tabi replies, this is not impossible to imagine. Zizek continues, that you are thus disturbed by a perverse desire. You constitute, like every good obsessional neurotic, you construct a ritual whose function is to exclude desire or the desire. But the ritual itself is, again, invested by an enjoying, or an enjoyment if you want. But it's jouir, it's not jouissance there. An enjoying. It comes back in the very form of the masochistic ritual, although one of the functions of the unconscious is to maintain at a distance the prohibited enjoying. So you're trying to keep the object of your enjoyment at a distance by means of a ritual, and you begin to enjoy the ritual in the same way that you enjoyed the forbidden object. This is also, this is as well the act done by children, which consists in reversing the punishment to which they are condemned by means of a ritual which brings enjoyment in the punishment itself. So you're taking enjoyment in the punishment. It's very important to underline this other aspect of enjoyment in Lacan. In its very loss, enjoyment is everywhere. It returns always, and it is this also that is the real. So he's theorizing both the real and enjoyment in different ways, in different epochs, and we're going to see that is going to have consequences for the way Lacan and Zizek after him theorizes the goal of the cure, the goal of analysis. Fabien Tabi continues, just as the parallax insists on the point of view from one point of view to another. So just as the parallax insists from one point of view to another in the order of theory, in order to seize the real, or thus to enjoy it, to enjoy the real, theoretically, which is impossibility itself, and reconstitutes, therefore, new perspectives. So Fabian Tabi has given us a sort of brain-cracking response. It's not even a question as such. It's saying, tell me more. Zizek. Have I got it? Zizek replies, yes, there you are. You've got it. So where then is truly my difference from Lacan? Now he goes into a list of three differences that he himself, Zizek, has with Lacan's position. The differences with Lacan or from Lacan, of which I am conscious. So there may be other differences, but the ones of which Zizek is conscious are rather differences between our readings. For example, the way in which Lacan disposes of Hegel. Lacan does not know that he's more Hegelian than he thinks. Lacan does not know that he's more Hegelian than he thinks. Isn't there an echo there of "Forgive them, for they know not what they do"? So Lacan does not know that he's doing Hegel because he's got a wrong image of Hegel. So this is le non-dupe air applied to Lacan. Lacan has what we know to be a wrong image of Hegel, and because Lacan is not duped by Hegel, he is wrong. That's one sense of to err, and because he has this wrong image of Hegel and decides not to be duped by it, he wanders, and it's in this wandering that he becomes most Hegelian. I'm happy with that insight. Anyhow, Lacan doesn't know that he's more Hegelian than he thinks. He knows not. As well, moreover, what I don't like in Lacan is that there is sometimes a movement towards wisdom, in scare quotes, a conformism. So he's accusing Lacan of trying to be or going towards, not really, he's not saying he's not there, but there's this tendency towards wisdom or conformism. Jacques-Alain Miller is right when he reads Lacan's distance with May 68 as a liberal critique. But he, that is Miller, is wrong to subscribe to that. So we all know that Lacan criticized the students' revolt in May 68, saying that they will soon have another master. Jacques-Alain Miller apparently called this critique made by Lacan of the revolt a liberal critique. That was good. Lacan was being conformist there, according to Zizek. And the bad part is that Miller agrees with this conformist aspect of Lacan there. So we see why, this is years later, but Zizek is thinking out loud about why there was this break with Miller, why Zizek broke with Miller. What he, that is to say Miller, what Miller calls Lacan's liberalism, in parentheses, Zizek spells out what that means, Lacan's liberalism. If you're if you want, by wanting communism too much, one goes straight to catastrophe, etc. So one must remain modest. So calls the liberalism of Lacan, wanting communism leads to catastrophe, etc. So let's stay modest. Is this fear of the great questions. So somehow Lacan, for Zizek, is revolutionary in the, we can't say content because we've just said the all along content is substantification and so on. But what is revolutionary in the working through or the progression of Lacan's theorizing is mitigated by this liberal conservatism and this fear of going into and taking into account or discussing the great questions. So this insistence on modesty and not rocking the boat. Or this idea present in the ethics of psychoanalysis that one finds also in Miller's work, that the encounter with the real is only a moment of stupefying force, and that one must next come back to a wise distance. What I detest is this gesture of wisdom, which consists in saying that when there is nothing to discover except the real, it is better to keep oneself at a healthy distance from everything, conscious that it is only an empty spectacle. So that last bit needs more interpretation. He'll explain himself a little later on. But we've got, in a nutshell, three differences sketched out by Zizek to explain his disagreements or his differences from Lacan. One is the question of reading, in particular, the reading of Hegel. So Zizek takes a stand. He collapses the wave packet and takes a stand and says Lacan got Hegel wrong. The second one is a political objection. Lacan was pretty much a liberal and a conservative, a conformist rather, and not radical, and that led to an over-timid approach to discussing the great questions. So it doesn't say what the great questions are, but some of these questions, at least, seem to be political questions. And the third difference is this idea that in your in analysis you have a stupefying or blinding even encounter with the real, and so an ecstatic encounter, and you pull back and you keep the position of wisdom, and you keep a healthy distance from everything. So you see everything as an empty spectacle, but that has no political consequences. You stay. You've had your blinding encounter with the real, and you come back to conformism, but conformism with an inner distance inside. So they're the three differences of Zizek with Lacan. Fabien Tarby picks up on this wisdom and a healthy distance from everything. The Stoic and the Buddhist way, or as well, Schopenhauer's way. Zizek replies, well, I detest all that, for the crucial problem is one of fidelity. That is the greatness of Alain Badiou. I don't give a damn about this ecstatic moment of discovery of the real. So this ecstatic discovery of the real is, if we force the argument a little, is too transcendent. You've got a transcendent encounter in the light of which it's all meaningless, empty spectacle around you. But the more important moment is not coming back to conformism, it's coming back to fidelity, to an enriched version of fidelity, and so engagement. Fabien Tarby continues. So this is already an hour. And I'm only in the first section. So maybe I'll stop there on the suspense. Fabien Tarby says, the ecstatic moment, nauseous, making reference to Sartre's nausea, or even implacable neutrality. Okay, so he's saying, tell me more, Zizek, and I'll tell you more very soon. So thanks for listening. I hope my translating this is useful. I think there are some very interesting discussions and insights by Zizek. I hope you'll forgive my comments. Sometimes I clarify, and sometimes I actually take a stand on whether I agree or not with what Zizek says. In conclusion, for me, I overall agree with everything that Zizek is saying, except I have a minor disagreement with the reality of the conceptual character, the negative conceptual characters that he sets up. But I agree with the lesson that he is trying to draw from the setting up, or from the drama that makes use of these negative conceptual characters. So I hope to continue soon. maybe I have to cut each subsection, each section into smaller subsections. I think this subsection was the longest. The second one on Lacan's readings is from page 33 to page 39. It's only 6 pages. There remains 2 pages from this first subsection. Maybe I can do all of that together next time. We'll see. So thank you. Thanks for listening. And please remember to desubstantify as much as possible and to be a transvert and not a pervert. Bye-bye.